Call David Clinton.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Kia ora koutou. Mr Speaker, the Greens, like all other members and parties in this House, are eager to see a successful event in 2011. It is the largest sporting event this country's ever hosted. It's large even on an international scale. There are significant opportunities to showcase the country, its businesses, its tourism opportunities, all of those things. We had quite an engaged debate about this bill and our support for it or not. The outcome of that was we're not entirely convinced of the need for a bill to facilitate what is apparently needed, though I have listened with interest, particularly to Mr Mallard's comments. What we are quite clear about is that we cannot support this bill in its present form. When we look at this bill, effectively what we see is the construction of a large rubber stamp that will give extraordinary powers to the Minister to override normal processes through resource management, through liquor licensing and various other consenting and licensing approvals. When the news broke in 2005 that we had the rights to the Cup somewhat unexpectedly, at that point clearly we had a 6-year window of opportunity to make this thing happen. We're now 5 years into that. We have another year ahead of us before kick-off at the first game. You think it through, what is this Cup effectively? It's a series of rugby games with a number of hospitality and other events that will be organised around it. The scale is new, but after all we do have significant experience in this country of organising sports tournaments, in particular rugby tournaments. I take Mr Mallard's point that we don't know what we don't know. There is the possibility of something entirely unforeseen. But we fail to see that there is a need for the extremely wide-ranging powers given to the Minister in this bill to deal with these unforeseen circumstances, or so-called unforeseen circumstances of urgency that will necessitate overriding the standard RMA and other processes to ensure that activities or facilities can be made available. We have had 5 years and we have another year ahead of us to plan and to prepare for this event. I'd have more faith perhaps than others in the ability of the people charged with organising these events, this series of events, to have got it right substantially. Mr Brownlee, in presenting the bill, suggested the example of erecting a marquee. I mean, acknowledging that Auckland has not, in particular, has not always been faultless in getting these various processes through, I cannot believe that anybody would fail to get a resource consent for a marquee erection in under a year. It simply wouldn't happen. It's quite a nonsensical suggestion to say we need special empowering legislation to erect a marquee where people can eat and drink and party for an evening or two. Why the need to overrule the Sale of Liquor Act provisions? There will be rugby and drinking go hand in hand in this country. Probably a lot of it. We're aware of the Law Commission's recent report that indicated perhaps we need to remove sport from liquor to a more significant degree than we do. But nonetheless, many of us probably have had the experience of applying for a special liquor licence. I've done it personally for events around community groups. I was on a board of trustees. We had cabaret nights. It's actually not a complicated or a difficult process to get a special licence for an event, to serve liquor, to sell it, to supply it. We fail to see why we need to override a piece of legislation, a Sale of Liquor Act, that seems to work reasonably well, reasonably quietly, and that we have had in place for a very long time. It's interesting to note that in the executive summary that accompanies the bill, at the time of writing of that document, the police were opposed to the idea of creating a whole new regime for this licensing. And clearly, according to these announcements in the last week or so, the police have come around to the position of saying it's okay. Clearly, their primary focus is on public safety, preventing disorder and so on. The fact is that taking away the sale of liquor provisions does significantly reduce the opportunity for people to participate, to have a say, to appeal and to be heard generally. There's a provision in the bill, and it's quite concerning. It specifically prohibits the authority from considering the impact of it on existing licensed holders, either special people getting licences under this legislation proposed or under the Sale of Liquor Act. And we think that's unfortunate that hospitality providers who have invested and are investing heavily in providing venues and services for this bill could potentially be undermined if one-off facilities, if you like, are allowed. If I was the owner of a hospitality venue at the Viaduct, for example, I'd be very concerned that somebody might put up a marquee, add a bar and some music, some big screens, and take business away when I've been investing heavily in that business. The executive summary under the risk assessment heading says, and I quote, that the purpose of the legislation is not to supplant existing resource management, liquor licensing and other consenting processes, but to support the existing regime with additional measures that the unique circumstances of the CUP may call upon. And I hope that the author of those words actually had the good grace to blush as they wrote them, because exactly what this proposed legislation does is supplant resource management provision. It does supplant the existing and quite satisfactory and adequate Sale of Liquor Act. So I do wonder again at the necessity, the perceived necessity for this piece of legislation, acknowledging there may be a requirement for something for the extreme, genuinely unforeseen emergency circumstance, but this bill goes many steps too far for us to support at this point. We are told that the provisions of it could reduce compliance costs, perhaps streamline processes, increase the level of national consistency, and potentially it could do that. It's always easy to streamline, to make things happen more quickly and more cheaply. Whether we would get desirable outcomes, however, is a moot point, and we certainly would be doing that at the cost of allowing reasonable opportunity for public participation, the public right to know and to be heard, and for rights of appeal to be carried through as they would. So on balance, with the best will in the world towards the event itself, and acknowledging there may be a justifiable argument to be made for some modest degree of or extra power to be given to a minister, we cannot in all conscience support this bill with its extremely wide-ranging powers. Effectively, we cannot and will not support the notion of a rubber stamp. Kia ora koutou.